In this tutorial, you'll learn how you can use the advanced crop overlay features in Websharp Pro in order to take your image and split it into multiple rows or columns. Now, most of the time, you'll probably export an entire image as you see it as a single image, but there are times when splitting it into a sliced output can really improve the viewing experience. For example, on Instagram, there isn't a native horizontal way to view the images. If I export this entire image to Instagram, then the viewer is going to view it horizontally on a vertical screen, and there'll be a whole bunch of extra stuff below and above, other images, comments, etc. It's not the way I want my image to be seen. And even if you rotate the image sideways, you're still dealing with a small screen. So what we can do is think a little unconventionally, and instead of showing the image all at once, show slices of the image. So instead of this overall big landscape, imagine you create a slice like this, which is the vertical orientation of your phone. And that's the left side of your image. And then the user would click to get the next slice, which is more like this, and then this, and they keep clicking to effectively scroll across the image with a series of overlapping vertical images. So it's almost like panning from left to right. In a video, you just create a number of slices to do that. That's what we're going to do here. So what we need to do first is create our template, and I'm going to go edit the master template by holding Command or Control and clicking on Crop Overlay, where we have all of our existing templates, which I'm going to hide so we can just focus on the new one here. Click on Plus Overlays, and we want this advanced interface. If you're seeing the basic interface like this, you don't have options for rows or columns. So click on Advanced Options, and then you'll see rows and columns here. That's the key thing. Now, the way that this works is up top is the overall image area prior to being sliced. So imagine if you reassembled all the pieces and you eliminated any overlap, these would be the dimensions of what you've exported. But then the rows and columns down below specify how things get split. So we need to work with these together based on what we're trying to create and the requirements of the platform. In the case of an Instagram story, you're working with something that's 1920 tall by 1080 wide. That's 1080p flipped sideways. And I would like to create a template that is not specific to the one image, but would work for panning horizontally across any image. So rather than specifying both width and height, what I really care about is the overall height matches Instagram's requirements, and then I slice it into columns. And the way to do that is to change over to the fixed height template where it says keep full image. This will keep the entire image, but it will just slice things up as needed in order to give us the results that we want. So I choose this, and I'm going to rename this into IG Story Full Pano. That's going to be what I'm creating here. And we need to set the height, and we need to set the columns. So let's start with the height. The height has to match their requirements, which are 1920 tall. Every single slice has to be that height. And then our columns, we can choose how many columns we want, and I'm going to go for a bunch, like maybe let's go to 12 columns, create a lot of columns, and each of these has to also fit their size requirements. This is going to be 1080 wide. So we're creating something which is 1920 tall and 1080 wide. 12 of them are going to overlap and create the overall image. And this little footnote here is telling us what we're getting. So the output is 1920 by 1080 wide with 12 columns. Now, if we were working with a specific image, or if we had set the width in some way, it would tell us how much overlap we have, but we're not getting a note there because this width will be dynamically set. It's not specified in the template, so no matter how wide the image is, it's always going to be this height, and then the width will just be set in order to keep the full image without cropping. So that's it. We're set with this template. Let's click Add this template, and you'll see it will be imported here. And we're now ready with this as our new template. And we'll just simply save this by clicking the X. We'll say save. And now we can use that crop overlay by clicking on crop overlay to import that visible template. And notice how it got resized to fit the entirety of this image. It will always resize to fit the full image. And I'll show you an example of a different approach in a moment. But let's go ahead and execute with this. So I have it set to export to this folder. I'm just going to click on sharpen, and it will export according to our settings. So it's going to resize, sharpen, create the output, and then slice that output and save it as a series of these overlapping images. So here you can see it's kind of panning across, and I've got it set to output as a subfolder with my name. So let's open it up and take a look at this output. You can see there's a series of images here, and I can just click through them. So imagine this is my phone, and that's the output I'm getting is this horizontal panning. This would represent the view on my phone. So the viewer is going to go in and they're going to see something that looks like that as they kind of pan left and right, which is a pretty cool way of experiencing that image. Now let's go in and let's look at something a little bit different. So this was imported to the image when it was this wide. Let's go ahead and trash that overlay and take a look if we had a more narrow image. I'm just going to manually crop this image. Hit C for the crop tool, and let's just bring in the left, bring in the right, something like this. It's kind of arbitrary. It doesn't really matter, and I'm just going to accept that. So if I was working with an image like this, which is more kind of square, that template is still going to work because the template does not specify a width. It just wants to keep all of the width based on the fixed height we set. So we'll click on crop overlay, and notice how it got rescaled to that size. So it's actually been squished horizontally. The crop in areas, the image is not going to be squished, but it fits the full image to keep everything. And this is now going to be our new exported area. It's still going to export with 12 columns, which means there's more overlap here. So I might want to use less columns, but let's try it again. And I'm going to just delete this guy and export. So we'll have our 12 exported columns, and it's going to slice it up, and we'll see the movement is going to be, well, now it's warning, so there's just too much overlap. You can really see it's a very small amount. So 12 is certainly the wrong number here. But let's just take a look at what we've got here. So if we were to slide through this, you see it moves very, very slowly. And I'd like something a little bit less than that. So let's go in and let's try this again. I'm going to delete this. I don't have to recreate my master template. These are very easy to edit, some of these basics. So if I just go in here, I can just change it from the 12C, which is 12 columns, to maybe I'll just use 6 columns, 6C. So this is going to be 1920 high, 6 columns at 1080 wide in terms of column width. That's the CW. So now we'll click on this, and it's going to have more movement frame to frame because there's only 6 slices. So each slice is the same size as before, but it's just going to move a little bit faster. Now we'll see as we move through that, that looks a little more natural. So for that orientation of the image where it's more square, I don't need as many columns to get across the whole width because I wasn't moving as far across that image. So that's preserving the entire image. Let's step back and start over from this image and imagine that instead of keeping the whole image, I'd like to narrow it down to something more of a cinematic ratio. I don't need the full height here. It's open sky and it's open water. So I think something like a 16:9 ratio could look really interesting. And maybe that's something that I don't use very often. So I'll just create it as a one-off. So instead of command clicking to get the master template, I'm going to shift click, which will let me create the template right here in this file. So I just use it on this image, and then it doesn't get added to my master template. So let's go and switch over to that ratio, which is the 16:9 cinematic in the horizontal orientation. And once again, we just need to set these dimensions as required. So I need to set my height to fit the requirements for the platform, which are the 1920 tall. And here it's telling me the width is 3413. It's kind of a meaningless number in the sense that, yes, that is the output, but we don't really care how wide it is because we're never reassembling this panorama to fit any requirement. What we do care is that our row height is going to match the size that we see on the phone. And now we just need to set our columns. And let's go once again to something like 12 columns. And these, again, need to be the same 1080 wide. Now, when we create this, notice that this time we get an 80% overlap estimate because now we're working with specific dimensions. This is no longer an unknown width. It's actually fixed because it's fixed within the 16:9 ratio. So we have 80% overlap. And if you took a look at that and said, you know what, that's really more overlap than I want, you could go and choose something more like 10 columns, and now it's 76, maybe say 8. All right, 69% overlap. It's 2/3 overlap. I think that should be pretty good. So we'll use that. But again, what's key here is that we're hitting the 1920 tall by 1080 per slice requirement. Notice the 1920 is also shown here in the row height. So that's another way of viewing that is to say, do these dimensions match the platform? I'm not typing in the row height here because that's being pulled from the master in a single row scenario here. but that's effectively what we have. So I think that looks good. Let's add our template. Goes right into our image. And of course, you can see that it is cropping the image. So we're having a different overall output, meaning we're going to see this building up close and personal. It's going to look bigger on the screen because we're enlarging just this portion of the image to fit the output. So let's go ahead and sharpen this, and we'll take a look at the output we get in just a moment here. So we'll click into our folder, and here we see going from left to right. It's just a more intimate view of the same scene. I think it looks really good, other than I don't like the centering here. I'd actually like to make this a little bit more in the middle. So let's go ahead and try again. I'll just delete this, and I'm just going to take this and just hitting V for my move tool and then shift click down. So I'm moving it something more like this, where I've got more of an even spacing. So I'm just using the crop overlay to get a visual representation of my output. I think that looks good. And let's export that version of it. So, as you can see, a lot of flexibility with these templates to get whatever you need. And we'll take a look at our slices here. And we see that now we have this view, which just looks more interesting and symmetrical to me. So I think that would be a great export for Instagram. And let's take a look at one other way we might approach this. So let's hide this. And instead, let's say you want to just export the whole thing as two images. Imagine you've got like kind of a left and you've got kind of a right. And it's rough because I want each of these to match the size requirements of Instagram, but it's going to be kind of a slider across this. So let's go and add a template for that. So I'm going to deselect, shift click to add it right to this image. And what I need is a vertical orientation for Instagram. And I could go with that same story size, or I could pull something like the portrait size here. Now I can't work with these dimensions. I just want to reference that it's going to be 1350 tall by 1080 wide. That's the individual slice size that I need to hit. So 1080, 1350. And we'll just go in and manually specify this. So it's going to be the 1350 tall. And it was 1080 wide, but we need two of them. So it'll be 2160, 1080 times 2 to give us these dimensions. And now we'll just tell it we want 2 columns. And I don't need to type in the column width. It's automatically assumed to be half. And you see the confirmation here that we have our 1350 high by 1080 wide in the slice with no overlap. I don't want any overlap. This is going to be something where it's split exactly down that middle, and then you can just slide left or right on the screen. If you kind of hold with your finger, you can gently move between the two. So we get that nice little Instagram slider effect. So let's add this. And then we'll go and just create this output, which will just be the 2 slices. And I didn't even show it here, but with our output here, notice that there is a little bit of cropping to fit that form factor because we had to hit the size of 2 side-by-side windows with no overlap. And so in here, which I should have given a better name, you can see now we've split the image into a left and a right. You'd be able to slide through. So multiple different ways you might use this tool. If you're working with the rows, it's the exact same thing that we've done here for columns, all the same concepts. Most of the time, what you'll probably want to do is just go with a fixed height, use the columns and the height here, and do a horizontal pano. Or if you're doing a vertical pano, you'd probably work with a fixed width and then just do the opposite.